Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Jeannie Burlowski, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. And thanks for hanging in there with us through all this. We've had some real technical challenges today, and it's been a lot of fun. So like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about the amazing things that you're doing, working with students and with parents so that their kids can graduate from college debt-free. With all the college debt issues, almost a crisis we have going on in this country, this is incredibly important. We want to talk about your book launch, right? We want to talk about your conference speaking. We want to talk about the strategy that you share with people to help them be able to live a more debt-free life. This is incredible what you're doing, and I'm incredibly excited for our time together. So thank you for being here.
Mike, people love to be on your podcast, and I am so happy to be here.
I'm excited. So where were you born?
I was born in Ely, Minnesota, which is so close to Canada that you can canoe in there if you put your mind to it.
Wow. So that's pretty far north.
Oh, this is a little tiny town. It was 100 miles to the nearest McDonald's when I was a kid.
Wow.
If you looked at a kid in a school there and said, are any of these kids going to make anything of themselves? The answer would be no.
Wow. That's incredible. Now, did you grow up there?
I was born there, raised there. My dad worked for a mining company, hauling taconite tailings back and forth. My mother was a housewife.
Wow. So growing up there, what was your favorite thing about growing up there?
It was a small enough town, probably about 5,000 people when I lived there. A small enough town that you knew people. And when you go to the grocery store, you would see 3 people that you knew. And you had friends that knew your other friends. And then the other thing is, this is a gorgeous part of the world. This is where there are lakes with rocky shorelines and tall pines, and people come from all over the world to experience the wilderness. And my dad was very much into that, hunting and fishing. And I grew up on a lake. And so those 2 things were my favorites.
Awesome. So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Most influential person. I had a number of teachers that that were great. And there was one, my 2nd grade teacher, I saw her as an adult. I saw her in town at the 4th of July parade. And I said, Mrs. Merle, you always made me feel like I was so smart. Mm-hmm. She said, well, you were smart, Jean. So I would say it was teachers that saw something in me. And then another thing is faith is a huge part of my life. And that was a big influence. Yeah. That made me think that there's a presence in this world that wants me to be bigger than my circumstances. Right. And maybe that gave me the guts to step out and try to do something big to help the world.
That's awesome. In high school, did you have a favorite subject?
I did appreciate the music department and the theater department, but probably my favorite was the English department. Okay. I was also in this, by the time I was in high school, I lived in Oregon, and it was bigger. And I was a part of a gifted program, and they had high expectations of us, and they let us run wild with our own ideas. English and the gifted program are probably my favorites.
Gotcha. Did you have a favorite teacher in high school?
Yes, Mr. Clyde Curley, who is the author of the book A Cup of Hemlock. He interviewed Bob Dylan. He directed he directed Cher in a talent show somewhere
Wow.
when she was young. Yes, that was my favorite. And he was a person that would look at me and say, "You are smart, you are talented, you're going to go somewhere."
Oh, I love that. I love that. Isn't it amazing how teachers have that effect on you? Like they can change your life.
Right.
Just amazing. Shout out to all our teachers out there, right? So my second grade teacher, I ran into her and I was 40 some years old. I ran into her, her name's Mrs. Garrett. She was living across the hall from my grandmother and I bumped into her in the elevator. I didn't even say a thing. She just looked at me and she said, "Mike Litton, you haven't changed a bit." No joke. After like 30 some years, right? Yeah,
Mike, I'm sure you have changed a little bit.
a little, just a little, right? So after high school, where do you go?
After high school, I went straight to college. My parents had gotten a divorce, and so I didn't really want to go too far from home. I was living with my mom, and I had already had enough disruption in my life. So I went to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, which is where Monica Lewinsky went.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
hold that against me.
Yeah, I won't. I
I
promise.
was there long before her.
Right. Right. So what did you study at Lewis and Clark?
I study communication in English. And nowadays, I help college students to figure out what they want to do with their lives. We say
Yeah.
clarify the bullseye on the target before you
Yeah.
take and shoot.
Right.
So you can go all the way through college with not one wasted dollar, not one wasted class. We don't want people to get a political science degree and then come back and start college over again and get a nursing degree because
Right.
they can get a political science job. Well, back then I didn't know about this, but I am strategic enough naturally. I knew from the very beginning, I better figure out what I want to do with my life. And so, really interesting. I did something as an 18-year-old I still think was very, very smart. I opened up the college catalog and I went through and I identified classes that I thought I would be really good at and really interested in. So if there was something I thought, oh, I'd be so awesome at that, I could get an A without ever even studying, that was a sign to me that that was probably something I was naturally good at, naturally talented in. I highlighted all those things, and then I looked for where the patterns were, and they were all falling right in the speech communication and English department. It was all about communication. And then later I realized how strategic I am because of this. I was able to take the Clifton Strengths Assessment, which we may want to ask me about. But then it became about strategic communication.
Mhm.
And that really set me on my path to where I am now.
So what was your favorite thing about attending Lewis and Clark College?
It was a gorgeous, beautiful campus. And again, there were great teachers there. There were a whole lot of smart kids, not egghead kids, but kids who were really engaged with life and doing things. And I also appreciated that it was close to my grandparents' house. I had had a lot of disruption in my life with my parents' divorce, and I had family right there. I had a nice church that I loved. I could go, my mom was an hour and a half away or something. So it didn't feel too far, but it felt like an adventure.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So after you graduate from Lewis and Clark, where do you go?
That was a tumultuous time. And I always say people do not give college students enough credit for how difficult that time period is, that transition period between my college graduation and then starting a first job. Now, I didn't have anyone in my life like me, like Jeannie Burlowski is now. I didn't have any direction. My father worked for a mining company on a dirty train hauling taconite tailings, and my mother was a housewife. So I didn't have anyone telling me you should do 3 internships in college and then start applying for jobs a year before you graduate and have a job lined up when you're done. I didn't know any of that. So when I graduated, I kind of floundered a little bit. And one really good thing is I ended up back at home in Minnesota.
Mhm.
And there I became close to my uncle, who I knew on and off. He was a flight attendant. He was always traveling. He never married, never had any kids. I wound up back in Minnesota where my uncle owned a lake cabin.
Hmm.
He and I became so close, and I just loved him so much. And I was the closest thing he had to a daughter. And because I ended up back there, he actually gave me that lake cabin.
Wow.
I own 200 feet of shoreline on Lake Vermilion in northern Minnesota, which is just absolutely unheard of. And he and so that was a big part of the story there. Though I was floundering career-wise, I'm so glad that I took that path.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So where did you go after college?
So I went
to go to
back.
work.
So I went back to Minnesota, and I just kind of took little cobbled together jobs, like something that had nothing to do with English or communication. I was taking care of elderly people in their house for a while. And then here was the pivotal moment.
Okay.
So I'm sitting in a restaurant waiting for someone to meet me.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened up this little newspaper called the City Pages. They're defunct in Minneapolis right now. And there was an ad in there, and it said, "We are the Stanley H. Kaplan Educational Center. We're the largest test preparation organization in the world, and we're looking for SAT and ACT teachers."
Mm-hmm.
And they said, it's a part-time gig. You do it on the side of whatever else you're doing. And they said, "We are looking for people who have extremely high test scores, and they have extraordinary communication skills and grades over a 3.8. And honestly, I looked at that ad and I was irritated.
Really?
I called the people up and I said, "Who are you that you think you can attract this kind of person that has these high grades and high test scores and great communication skills?" And they
For
said,
a part-time job.
They said, "We're Stanley H. Kaplan. We're the world's leader in test preparation." And so they said, "Who are you? What are your grades? What are your test scores?" So I told them, they said, "Would you please come in here for an interview? We're really hiring instructors." And so I went in just on a whim to see what they were doing. And immediately I was just struck with this idea of stand up in front of 40 kids and inspire them on how to do reading comprehension passages in the most efficient way so they can take their score from here to here. And Kaplan did a really good job of training instructors, and they still do. And so I went to work for Kaplan, and I was at first just a part-time teacher. I was so good at it. My students would go down to the office afterwards and rave about me. They then had me teaching. By the time I was done, I taught LSAT, GMAT, GRE, SAT, ACT, PSAT. I taught the MCAT for medical school. I taught their speed reading class. And while I'm in there, because I'm naturally strategic, this is my number one strength on the Strengths Finder inventory, strategic. So I started to think of ways that Kaplan could make more money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? So one day the director called me into his office and he said, "We're going to start up a part-time marketing position at this particular Kaplan Center." This is Minneapolis, St. Paul. And the Kaplan's 120 locations nationwide at the time. So this was just the Minneapolis one, which was, I think, the 12th largest Kaplan Center in the country. He said, we're going to start out a local marketing sales kind of a person. We were wondering if you would consider doing it. It's a part-time thing. And I said, "Well, I did have this idea and this idea and this idea." And they said, "When can you start?"
Mm-hmm.
And so that was where I let go of all my little part-time gigs, and I just simply went to work for them. And what I did is cobbled together this beautiful thing where I would go to work at 2:00 in the afternoon, and I would do marketing stuff from 2:00 p.m. to 6:00 p.m., grab a sandwich, and then I would go and teach my evening Kaplan classes from 6 to 10. And it was everything I loved, is all this communication and inspiring people and developing people and the ideas. I've got ideation is in my top 10 on the Strengths Finder, all these ideas about making more money and implementing that. It was a combination of a few different things. And this is what really gave birth to what I do now.
Awesome.
Do you want to ask me about how that transition happened?
Absolutely. How did it happen?
So, I'm teaching Kaplan LSAT classes. This is the law school admissions test. I'm teaching the GMAT, this graduate management admissions test. MCAT for
MCATs,
medical school.
right?
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you're teaching the LSAT exam, Kaplan does a really good job of teaching you how to do this.
Mhm.
And half of the LSAT exam is diagramming argument and then strengthening and weakening it. So
Okay.
you have to be really fast. You
Mhm.
have to look at a paragraph, identify the conclusion, the evidence, the central assumption, and then to strengthen the argument, you strengthen the central assumption. To weaken the argument, you weaken it. And not only did I have to be really good at this, but I had to stand up in front of a classroom of 40 future lawyers, and I had to argue with them about why A was the right answer and B was not the right answer. Because we're doing test preparation.
Yeah.
And boy, these students, these are future lawyers. They're not afraid to push back at you, and they're very proud of having put B, and you're trying to say the answer's A.
Right.
And of course, I was very well trained, but I just got so good at analyzing argument. So then these kids start coming up to me after class, and they could tell I just loved them. I loved every one of them. I never had a kid, I say kids, they were in their 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
I never had one I didn't just love. So they'd come up to me and say, I wrote a personal statement for myself to get into medical school. Would you look at it for me? I wasn't trained in how to do this.
Right.
I did know argument backwards and forwards. And I'll
Mhm.
give you an example. There was one kid that came up and he showed me his beautiful essay he had typed up for try to get into medical school. It's a one-page essay, 5,300 characters. And I said, well, what you said here is I went on a mission trip to Haiti and I fell in a sewer. Therefore, I should be a doctor. Is that what you meant to say? He goes, no, that's not what I meant to say. And so I said, well, why don't we look at the real reasons why it really does make sense for you
Mhm.
to be a doctor? And let's make space in this essay to put all of that stuff in. And so I would just rearrange things. I'd say restructure it so this story is first, and then you say what your goal is, and then you say 5 things lead me to believe I'm a strong candidate for such a career. Hit 5 things and support them all with evidence. And my goodness, the people I was helping for free started just getting into medical school and law school left and right. Sometimes they
Wow.
they had applied 3 times with no luck. And I can tell you later, they were talking about volleyball in their personal statements for medical
Mhm.
school. And I would say, why did you talk about volleyball instead of your research or instead of your clinical volunteering? And they'd say, I was trying to sound different from the rest of the crowd. I mean, you went completely off the rails, off the topic. Let's bring it back to what makes sense for medical school.
Right.
So line formed out my office door at Kaplan of people standing in lines, waiting a long time to talk to me about this. And I was doing it for free.
Wow.
Finally, Kaplan said, you can't do this anymore. We need you for other things. We need your ideation to help us make more money. And here I just love these kids and I just want to help them. And they've tried to apply 3 times. Bless them, they need some help.
Yeah.
And so my sweet husband said, you know what? By this time, the Kaplan work was very stressful. I was getting multiple kidney infections. It was just like every time I had a creative idea, it fell to me to implement the idea. So it was hours and hours and hours. You know, have you ever heard this line? If you accomplish the impossible one year, the following year, they'll make it part of your regular job description.
Right.
And
You
that's
just
just not
created your own job description, right?
That's just not sustainable. You
Yeah.
cannot continue to accomplish the impossible and then be held responsible for it the following year.
Right.
So my nice husband said, you know, why don't we just rent you an office and you just see clients for medical school and graduate school consulting? And so I quit all the marketing I was doing for Kaplan. You wore me out. Goodbye.
Mhm.
Got an office in the same block, a little windowless office in a beautiful colonial office building. And what I would do is I would see clients for medical school and graduate school consulting. I would see them from in the afternoon, and then I would eat a little sandwich, and I'd walk over to the Kaplan building and teach my LSAT class or
Mhm.
my CAT class or GMAT or GRE. So I was doing cobbling together 2 part-time things, both of them very much aligned with what I love to do and what I'm naturally good at. And then this is what really led to the book that I wrote.
Okay.
So I would always have to have a talk with my clients about their debt.
Yeah.
Mike, today you told me before we came on the air today that you're selling real estate, you got real estate. This is your niche. This is your thing, what you're really well known for. And you're telling me that you had two people from who were veterinarians. They each had $200,000 in student loan debt. The danger was they wouldn't qualify for a home loan. These are professional people who have doctor before their name, and there's danger they might not even be able to get a house. Well, I'm not going to help people and put them in some kind of position where their retirement is destroyed and they can't afford to buy a house. I'm too conscientious for that.
Yeah.
So every time I had a new client, I'd talk to them about their debt load, and I would say, what's your student loan debt like right now if we're looking at the cumulative? And sometimes I would have a kid say, I have $180,000 in student loan debt right now. And my jaw would drop because this is a person.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.